Usually when we look at a magnificent suspension bridge,
Yeah.
like the Golden Gate, we just see the aesthetics.
Oh, for sure. The architecture.
Right. We see the striking red paint or the elegant curve of those massive steel cables. We see the towering pillars against the skyline, and we just think of it as this beautiful, static piece of art.
Yeah, we admire the shape of it, but we rarely think about the invisible war happening inside those materials just to keep the bridge standing.
Exactly. And the bridge only survives because its internal geometry is perfectly aligned to absorb and, redirect all that violent energy. Which brings us to you, the listener, and the incredible self-adjusting suspension bridge that you are literally living inside of right now.
Your own skeleton.
Your skeleton. So in this deep dive, we are looking at Michael Meng's STEMgolf methodology. Specifically, we're pulling from Volume 2, which is Dynamic Skeletal Structure and Equilibrium.
It's a fascinating text.
It really is. And our mission today is to completely change how you view the forces running through your body, whether you're swinging a golf club at 100 miles an hour or literally just bending over to pick up a heavy box. We're looking at daily movement entirely through the lens of Newtonian physics.
It's a profound perspective shift, honestly, because we have to move away from looking at the human body as just, well, a collection of muscles straining to pull on bones.
Right, like the traditional fitness magazine view.
Exactly. The framework presented in Meng's work forces us to understand the body as a highly sophisticated load-bearing architectural structure. It bridges that gap between the raw physics of an object in motion and the actual biological reality of the human machine producing it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because in the earlier volumes of this methodology, the central takeaway was that athletic, power-like club head speed doesn't come from holding pretty static poses.
No, not at all.
It comes from massive physical forces. Right? We're talking centripetal force, elastic potential energy, ground reaction forces. But that leaves us with this massive mystery. What actually determines your body's ability to generate, transmit, and most importantly, survive those massive forces?
Right, without tearing a muscle or blowing out a disc.
Yes. How do we survive it?
Well, the answer lies in structural integrity. I mean, the core thesis of the text is that the body isn't just a biological engine. It is a force transmission framework.
A framework, okay.
Think of it this way. If a skyscraper's steel framework is misaligned, the building inevitably collapses under its own weight. In the human body, if your skeletal framework is misaligned during a really dynamic movement, you don't necessarily collapse to the ground in a heap.
Right, you don't just fall over.
Right, but your energy leaks violently, you lose power, you lose accuracy, and you just drastically spike your risk of injury.
The text actually uses a great visual here. It compares the skeleton to a transmission pathway, like the plumbing in a house or high-tension wires on a power grid.
I love that analogy.
So good, because you can have this massive power plant at the source, representing the strong muscles of your legs and core. But if the cables transmitting that power are frayed or the pipes are kinked,
the energy at the final destination drops completely.
Exactly. The force is generated, but it gets lost in transit.
Yeah, the transmission system is just entirely compromised. And to understand how that happens, Meng makes this crucial distinction by dividing the skeleton into two functional systems.
Okay, break those down for us.
So first you have the axial skeleton. This includes the skull, the spinal column, and the rib cage. This is your central load-bearing pillar.
Like the main support beam.
Precisely. Its primary job is to transmit vertical force and manage the really intense twisting or torsion required for rotation. And then you have the appendicular skeleton.
Which is the limbs, right?
Yes, your limbs, your pelvic girdle, and your shoulder girdle. The lower appendicular system, the legs and pelvis, receives forces from the ground. The upper system, your arms, delivers that force outward to the club or the racket.
Okay, wait, I'm struggling with this idea a little bit. Are my arms essentially just passive delivery cables, just servants to my spine?
In a structural sense, yes, they are whippy connectors.
But if that's true, why do professional athletes, guys like Bryson DeChambeau or Major League Baseball players, why do they spend so much time building massive forearm and bicep strength? If they're just structural pipes, why be so muscular?
That is a fantastic point. And it comes down to the difference between being an engine and being a brace.
Oh, okay.
Those massive arm muscles aren't the primary engine generating the rotational force. The lower body pushing into the ground and the torso rotating are doing the heavy lifting. The thick muscles in the arms act as high-tension bracing.
So they're holding it together.
Exactly. When you swing a piece of steel at 130 miles an hour, the centrifugal force is violently trying to rip your arm out of its shoulder socket. The muscle mass provides the structural integrity to keep that cable from snapping or stretching under extreme tension.
Oh, wow. So they were reinforcing the structural truss, not acting as the engine.
Exactly.
That makes perfect sense. They're the thick steel cables on our suspension bridge. And the text describes this entire interconnected skeletal framework using a specific engineering term, right? A statically indeterminate truss,
Yes. What's fascinating here is that a statically indeterminate truss is basically a system with built-in overlapping redundancy.
meaning backups.
Yes, it means there are multiple alternate pathways for force to travel through the structure.
So if one pathway is overloaded or compromised, the load just immediately shifts to an adjacent pathway to prevent a catastrophic failure.
That is precisely how a suspension bridge survives high winds. And your skeleton does this continuously. However, this brilliant redundancy only works safely if the primary joints are properly aligned.
Right, the alignment is key.
If you misalign a joint, say by slouching your shoulders or swaying your hips laterally, you force the skeleton to abandon its primary thick load-bearing pillars. You force it to use its emergency backup pathways for just normal, everyday movement.
And those backups aren't meant for that.
No. You end up stressing small ligaments and secondary structures that were never biologically designed to bear heavy dynamic loads.
Which logically leads us to look at the exact nature of these loads. Because if you look at the raw physics of a swing, the body is basically fighting a multi-front war.
It really is.
First, you have external forces, gravity pulling you down, and ground reaction forces violently pushing back up when you step or pivot.
Right, but external forces are essentially free energy, provided you capture them efficiently. The more complex battle involves internal forces. These are the forces your body actively exempts upon itself.
And the source material breaks these down into 4 distinct internal forces that our truss has to manage, right? Compression, tension, torsion, and shear.
Yes, the big 4.
Let's clarify the difference between these in a relatable way, so we aren't just swimming in physics jargon. Compression is relatively straightforward, right? It's a force that pushes structures together like pressing down on a spring.
Right, axial loading on the spine is a perfect example.
So when you stand up tall, gravity naturally compresses your vertebrae straight down. And compression is actually beneficial if it's distributed evenly, isn't it? Doesn't it build bone density?
It is deeply beneficial when aligned perfectly. The bones literally thrive on it. But compression becomes highly destructive if your posture is compromised and that downward force is concentrated onto the edge of a single tilted vertebra.
Yikes. Okay. And then you have tension, which is simply a pulling force,
Yeah,
like stretching a thick rubber band.
exactly. In any athletic swing, tension is how your muscles and fascia store elastic potential energy during the backswing. You stretch the tissues, loading them up, preparing them to snap back.
And torsion is the twisting force, the wringing out of the wet towel. When your upper body rotates one way while your lower body resists, that torsion is basically the engine of athletic power.
It is. It winds up that elastic tension we just talked about. But if torsion is left uncontrolled, like if your core doesn't brace actively against that twist, it severely strains the intervertebral discs.
Which brings us to the 4th force. And reading through the breakdown in the source material, I kept visualizing this one as the ultimate villain here. Shear. So shear doesn't store energy. It doesn't build bone density. It just bleeds power and shreds joints.
It does. Shear is unequivocally the enemy of the dynamic skeleton. While compression pushes straight down along the length of a bone, shear is a sliding force that acts horizontally across joint surfaces.
Okay, let me visualize this. If I stack 3 wooden building blocks perfectly vertically, I can press down on the top block with almost all my body weight and they won't move. Pure compression.
Very strong structure.
But if I push the middle block sideways, even with just 2 fingers, it easily slides out and the tower collapses. That sideways horizontal slide is shear.
That is the exact mechanical failure of shear. In the human body, the blocks are your vertebrae or your knee joints. The cartilage and ligaments are evolved to handle immense vertical compression, but they are highly vulnerable to that sideways sliding force. Yeah, in a dynamic movement, shear dissipates your stored energy. Every single joule of energy your body is forced to spend fighting lateral shear is a joule stolen from the clubhead.
So if shear and concentrated compression are constantly trying to tear our joints apart, the body must have some sort of built-in defense mechanism to fight them off.
It does, and it relies on a fundamental rule of structural engineering. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the rule is this. Curvature converts destructive shear into constructive compression.
Oh, this immediately makes me think of Roman aqueducts.
Perfect analogy.
Because when the Romans were building those massive stone structures to carry water, they knew that a flat slab of stone laid horizontally would just snap under the weight of the water. Stone has terrible shear strength.
Right, a flat surface fails almost instantly under a heavy vertical point load.
But when they built an arch, the curvature took that heavy braking weight and redirected it outward and downward along the curve. It turned shear into pure compressive strength, driving down the pillars.
The heavier the load, the tighter the curved stones compress together, making it stronger. You just perfectly described the mechanical principle governing your own skeleton. The text details the body's 3 structural keystones, the 3 primary arches.
Okay, what's the first one?
The lowest link in the chain is the foot arch. It functions as a dynamic weight-bearing tripod.
A tripod. What are the 3 points?
Your heel, the base of your big toe, and the base of your little toe. A highly functioning foot arch captures the shock of impact and redirects those ground reaction forces straight up the vertical pillar of the leg.
Okay, so moving up the skeletal chain, we hit the second keystone, the pelvic arch.
Right. The pelvic girdle is shaped quite literally like a bowl. It acts as a massive structural junction, capturing the upward force from your legs and channeling it directly into the spine. Because of its curved geometry, it takes what would normally be lateral shear force from your hips sliding sideways and curves it into upward vertical compression.
And the final keystone sits right inside that bowl, right?
Yes, the sacral arch. This is the curved, self-adjusting base of the spine. It is specifically angled to manage those intense, torsional, twisting moments of the swing.
So it's the transition zone between the rotating pelvis and the vertical spine.
Exactly. And when all 3 of these arches are actively engaged, Meng explains that the body achieves equilibrium in 3D.
Which is such a cool concept, because usually when we hear equilibrium, we picture a statue standing perfectly still. But here, it's dynamic balance across 3 different planes while you are moving violently.
Right. Static balance is easy.
Yeah.
Dynamic equilibrium requires constant systemic counterpressure. You have vertical equilibrium, where your downward push into the turf balances out gravity.
Right.
You have horizontal equilibrium, where shoe friction stops you from sliding sideways against the centrifugal pull. And the most complex piece is rotational equilibrium.
This is where the text uses that brilliant analogy of a helicopter.
It perfectly illustrates Newton's third law. If a helicopter didn't have a small tail rotor pushing forcefully against the massive spin of the overhead blades, the whole body of the helicopter would just spin wildly out of control in the opposite direction.
For every action, an equal and opposite reaction.
Yes. In your skeleton, your lower body acts as the tail rotor. It naturally has to counter-rotate or aggressively brace in the opposite direction to balance the massive torsional momentum of your upper body.
Okay, so we've got an interconnected system of Roman aqueducts acting as a statically indeterminate truss balanced like a helicopter in 3D space. It sounds like an indestructible machine.
In theory, yes.
But we know reality. Most amateur golfers, or honestly just people trying to lift a couch, struggle with power leaks, inconsistency, and chronic back pain. So where is this perfect machine breaking down?
The breakdowns almost always occur when we lose those protective geometric shapes. When we look at common flaws like swaying off the ball or standing up too early, we shouldn't look at them as golf problems. We need to diagnose them causally as structural, architectural failures.
Let's walk through those structural failures from the text, starting from the ground up, because the causality here is wild. Failure number 1 is the foot arch collapse.
Right, because the foot arch is a tripod. When the inner edge collapses flat against the ground, it triggers a devastating chain reaction. The arch is no longer sending force straight up. With the inner edge collapsed, the shin bone literally rotates inward.
Which cranks the knee out of alignment.
Violently. It forces the knee to cave inward. This is called valgus stress. That collapsing knee drops one side of the pelvis, which then tilts the sacral arch. A single flat foot cascades all the way up, resulting in lower back pain.
Man. And that flat foot leads directly into the second architectural failure, lateral sway.
Exactly. When your foot arches fail to grip the ground and establish horizontal equilibrium, your body physically cannot rotate cleanly around its center. Instead, your entire center of mass just glides sideways.
Introducing massive shear force across the knees and lower back.
You abandon efficient torsion entirely.
Okay, then there is spinal compression overload. The text points out this is usually caused by an anterior pelvic tilt. For anyone listening, this is that classic butt sticking out posture. So when I'm reaching deep into my car to grab a heavy bag of dog food and my lower back is rounded, my tailbone is sticking out.
You've essentially taken your sacral aqueduct, flattened out the curve, and then dropped a heavy shear load right onto the middle of the span.
Just bypassing the architecture completely.
You have completely compromised the protective geometry. The individual vertebrae take the full weight without the arch to distribute it, and that is exactly when you feel that sharp twinge in your lower back.
The structural members are failing. Which brings us to the fourth failure, torsional instability. This focuses on the core, but not in the way fitness influencers talk about it.
No, not at all.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Your core isn't just about having visible abs. The text explains that your core muscles actually act as a compression sleeve around your spinal column. It is exactly like the dense concrete poured around steel rebar inside a skyscraper pillar.
That's a perfect way to visualize it. The spine itself is the steel rebar. It can handle a tremendous amount of vertical weight, but if you aggressively twist a piece of steel without lateral support, it buckles.
Right.
The core musculature, specifically the deep transverse abdominis, acts as the concrete. It tightly braces the steel. Without that active compression sleeve engaging, when you violently twist your torso, the spinal column buckles under the torsion. You leak all that stored elastic energy out through your lower back.
Losing club head speed and risking a herniated disc. So if poor posture is a literal physical collapse of your internal suspension bridge, you, listening to this right now, need to know how to rebuild your foundation. We need to transition into building dynamic posture.
Absolutely. And rebuilding the bridge starts with static posture, what Meng's methodology terms axial stacking.
What does that look like?
When you are addressing a golf ball, or honestly just standing in line at the grocery store, your major joints should stack perfectly vertically. Your ears directly over your shoulders, shoulders over hips, hips over knees, and knees over ankles.
Plumb perfectly straight down the line.
The moment you are axially stacked, gravity loads your joints straight down the bone. This eliminates the moment arms, the mechanical leverages, that multiply destructive shear forces. Your rigid bones carry the weight, not your exhausted muscles.
And the text puts a massive emphasis on the pelvis during this phase. It calls pelvic neutrality the central control room of the human body. You don't want your tailbone tucked totally under, and you don't want it sticking way out, just a natural, gentle lumbar curve.
But static posture is only step one. You can be stacked perfectly standing still, but the moment you move, the forces change exponentially. That's why you must develop the strong back.
Which isn't about being rigid.
No, it's about actively bracing the truss for moving loads. It requires 3 distinct muscular systems to fire simultaneously. First, the deep core. We're talking the multifidus and transverse abdominis. The cue here is a gentle inward draw of your lower abdomen.
Not a hard face-turning red brace.
Exactly, just a 20% activation to pour that concrete sleeve. Second, you engage the erector chain glutes and erector spinae. These provide the anti-buckling resistance, keeping your spine tall. And third, stabilize the shoulder girdle.
Right, getting those shoulder blades in position.
Pull your scapulae subtly back and down. This creates a firm anchor point for your arm cables to swing from.
Having an intellectual understanding of all this is fantastic. We've talked about trusses, Roman aqueducts, concrete rebar.
Yeah.
But physical execution is a totally different beast. How does the listener actually feel these invisible forces right now in their living room?
Well, Meng provides 3 highly specific sensory drills designed to rebuild the structural awareness. You have to feel the architecture physically before you can swing with it.
Okay, let's do this interactively. If you are somewhere you can safely stand up, let's try drill number 1. Foot arch tripod grounding. Take your shoes off if you can. Stand barefoot on a hard floor. I want you to actively isolate and feel 3 specific points on the bottom of each foot.
The heel, the base of the big toe, and the base of the little toe.
Press those 3 distinct points firmly into the floor. Make sure the inner arch isn't collapsing. And here's the golden rule. Do not grip the floor with your toes. If you feel your shins burning, you're clawing the floor. Relax the toes. The stability has to come from the heavy base of the joints.
That is such an incredibly common mistake. Once that foot foundation is set, you move to drill 2, pelvic neutrality. While standing on your relaxed foot tripods, slowly exaggerate tilting your pelvis.
Stick your tailbone aggressively outward behind you. Feel that strain in your lower back. Then, slowly tilt it all the way forward, tucking your tailbone completely under your body. Rock back and forth between those two extremes. Then let your hips settle right into the exact balanced midpoint.
Your lower back should suddenly feel a gentle curve with zero muscular strain.
You've just rebuilt the sacral aqueduct. And that leads to drill 3. Spinal bracing. Your tripod is planted. Your pelvis is neutral. Now activate that deep core. And the text has a great trick for this. It's the deep muscle you feel tighten inside when you fake a cough.
Try it. Give a little gentle fake cough.
Feel that internal corset wrap tight around your waist. Give me a 20% effort. Gentle inward draw of that corset. Now slowly raise both of your heavy arms straight overhead. Notice how that instantly changes the weight distribution.
You should feel a pure axial load. A solid column of support running straight down your spine, through your neutral pelvis, into your foot tripods.
And critically, you should be able to breathe and talk normally. If you're holding your breath, you are bracing way too hard.
This raises an important question for anyone trying to improve their physical performance. We spend so much time obsessing over hand speed or buying new equipment, but a body that is well-structured at address yet immediately collapses internally under dynamic load is exactly like a beautiful skyscraper that looks solid right up until a strong wind blows.
The form has to be there.
Form must follow force. Structure precedes speed. If your structure leaks, your speed vanishes into thin air.
So what does this all mean? It completely changes the equation because it means everything we've explored today goes so far beyond golf tips. This methodology is quite literally the operating instruction manual for the human machine.
It really is.
The exact same engineering that lets an athlete violently swing a club at 120 miles per hour is the exact same Newtonian mechanics you rely on to safely lift a heavy box off the garage floor or effortlessly pick up your kid. It's about consciously aligning your truss to let your strong bones take the vertical compression and saving your vulnerable joints from shear.
It ultimately comes down to respecting the profound engineering of your own anatomy rather than fighting against it.
Which leaves us with one final, slightly provocative thought for you to mull over today. Think back to our opening image of that magnificent Golden Gate Bridge. If our own bodies are these incredibly evolved, self-adjusting architectural marvels, brilliantly designed by nature to handle massive compressive loads.
How much of our modern sedentary lifestyle is actively de-engineering our structural keystones?
Exactly. By sitting slouched over steering wheels and laptops for 10 hours a day, are we quietly dismantling our own internal suspension bridges long before we even step foot on an athletic field?
It's a sobering reality check, but it highlights exactly why consciously rebuilding these foundational arches is so vital to longevity.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the physics of you. Wherever you are right now, we highly encourage you to stand up, feel the solid ground through those foot tripods, stack your spinal aqueduct, and truly experience your own structural engineering. We'll catch you next time.